How's everybody doing today? This is Noah with the Life of the Zigs, coming back at you with another video on how I transformed my basement from this to this. So let's get started. Alright, so the first step here is start making your cuts in the ground for your plumbing. I had underground sewer pipe in my basement. Thankfully, I did not have to eject it anywhere out. So I made the cuts in the concrete, started digging, removing the concrete, and then started hooking up that PVC pipe. I used a 4-inch PVC pipe which went into an existing 4-inch sewer line, which I used a fern coat to attach to. After that was attached to, I plumbed it all out and started filling it back in with concrete. I just want to say I did pull a permit for this project. My town actually came out and inspected everything. They rough inspected the plumbing I did before I buried it in the concrete. Then they rough inspected my rough out, which was rough electrical, rough plumbing, framing, all that. And then they came and did a final inspection, and everything passed with flying colors. I had no issues, thankfully. Alright, so as you can already see, we got into the framing. This was the next step after the rough-in plumbing in the ground. I started using 2x4s with treated 2x4s on the bottom since it's going onto concrete. You could also put a layer of foam or a rubber seal plate, anything in between the concrete and the wood to separate it. I chose treated wood. I just thought this would be the easiest, which in case for me, it was the easiest. When it came to framing, I chose to use two different methods. The first method is building it out on the ground, putting it all together, then lifting it into place and tacking it to the current structure. The other method I chose to use was building it piece of wood by piece of wood and nailing each piece of wood into place as you go through and keep making your measurements and building. Both methods worked good for me. It really just depends on what you need to get around and what you need to frame out, in my opinion. When it came to the time for actually framing this, it took me 2 to 3 days. I did this project about a year and a half ago, so a lot of this stuff is fading my memory. Another thing to remember here is the drop-in shower pan. I needed a frame around it, so I already bought it and slid it in place, so it made it easy when it came to the measurements for actually framing. I could use that as the template itself. Another thing I want to touch on here is I used 3-inch long tap coms to mount the treated wood to the concrete. So I just used my hammer drill to drill through the wood itself and the concrete at the same time, and then used my hammer drill again to drill those tap coms into place. When it came to using a framing nailer, I chose to go with the Milwaukee M18 framing nailer. I know this has a very hefty price tag on it at around $400. Worth it for me though. This thing made it super easy to sink all those nails. I didn't have to worry about a compressor running at all or an air hose or anything like that. So if you can get your hands on a battery powered nailer, I would definitely go with one. I will say the one thing that made this framing difficult was having to go around the ductwork. I had a lot of ductwork to go around. Hopefully you don't have as much as I do, or it's actually recessed in the joists. However, all my ductwork was below the joist and I had to leave it where it was. Moving it was not an option. It would have been too much work and too difficult. So when it actually came to framing around the individual ductwork, I used 2x2s, screwed that to wherever I needed to attach it to. Then I used 3/4 inch thick plywood with another 2x2 mounted to it, and basically that encapsulated the ductwork so that when it came to mounting the drywall, it would have a nice firm foundation to mount to. Another reason why this method is good is it's super firm and secure. So let's say you have kids that like to throw stuff around or jump in there, or obviously carry stuff. It really protects that ductwork and the drywall from getting cracks, splits, or damage to it in general. The next step after framing was running electrical. First, I mounted the recessed light brackets. I used the Halo wafer lights, which I'll have a video out soon of me installing these on another house. Those brackets also make it super nice for when it's time to start mounting drywall to know exactly where you need to cut. Also, when running new electrical wire, especially to a renovation of this scale, make sure you put it all on its own breakers. For example, we had the bedroom on its own breaker, the game room or living room on its own breaker, And then the bathroom needs to be on its own GFCI protected breaker to code, and it needs to be a 20 amp breaker as well. I am not an electrician, however, my dad, who is helping me throughout this project, is. So thankfully, I had his expertise and skill set to help guide me through that process. When it came to those halo wafer style lights, I chose to put the box that comes with it and mount it up before I did any drywall or anything, since I had all that open space to work with. You don't need to, as you can just have those wires dangling down and do that later, but I figured it would just be the easiest to do it now before more stuff was in the way. The next thing here is installing the Panasonic heated vent light, which requires its own 20 amp breaker, and obviously 4 switches, one for the light, one for the night light, one for the heat, one for the fan. And then we vented it out the side of the house right there and installed a vent cap out there as well for it. While some of the electric was getting done by my dad, I chose to start doing some plumbing. I used a CPVC, which I know a lot of you guys are going to hate on me for using. It's what the house was already in, so I figured it would just be the easiest to do it in. I used the CPVC to pipe in the shower with the shower head. Again, it's not a tub, it's just a shower pan. And ran that back into the main supply with some valves. I also stubbed up there for the drain and used a Studer vent, which is allowed in my area, and used a sanitary tee since I have a double vanity going in there. While we were in the middle of working, the drywall and insulation and screws and mud got delivered, so we had to bring that all inside in case it was going to rain or anything like that. Then we continued with the rough-in plumbing. I had to stub out the hot and the cold lines for both sides of the vanity, and I had to stub out the line for the toilet. All this is on its own valve so that the whole house didn't need to be turned off, and obviously I can leave it off while we were working. The next step here is pouring some self-leveler where the shower pan's going to go. The floor wasn't entirely even there, so I had to make up for that slope by putting some self-leveler in. After that, I started putting in the ductwork. I used a little cutout tool that I got at Lowe's to make these round holes to insert where I was going to put each vent and return. Now I'm starting to get into the insulation. I used an R19 value faced insulation. According to the research I did, this was perfectly fine for my application. I looked if I needed to put plastic behind it or anything like that. However, and what I found, people recommended not to put plastic so that the walls behind it could breathe and not trap moisture if for whatever reason moisture ever got back there. After all the insulation was up, the next step was putting down the shower pan. When it came to putting down the shower pan, I used a mortar mix, put that down and set the pan in that, leveled it out, and then screwed it in. Just follow your instruction manual on how to do that for whatever pan you get. I also had to fix some more areas that weren't level. Now I needed to put in the 3 walls for the shower. We just went with a super basic shower here because we were going to sell the house at this point, so we didn't want anything too crazy. After that was in, it was time to start drywalling. I highly recommend getting a drywall lift or renting a drywall lift if you're going to be doing it by yourself like I was doing. I'll tell you one thing, it saved my back, and it also saved a lot of sheets of drywall from snapping in half, and it also made it super easy. Going back to the shower real quick, I just had to silicone all those seams and cracks and gaps before I forgot to do that. And once that was done, I just let it dry, and that shower's all sealed up. Moving back onto the drywall, I used a Milwaukee drywall gun with their auto feed attachment. It worked pretty well. It's not necessary to get it. I just chose to buy it because I like tools, and I said, well, why not? I got a lot of drywall to hang. However, if I could go back, I would not have bought that gun. I would have just got a drywall bit for my regular screw gun, because the amount of times it misfired, didn't sink the screws all the way, or just didn't work in general, it caused it honestly probably just as much time, if not longer, with the auto feed feature than just manually putting a screw in at a time and doing it myself. One tool that I highly recommend though is buying a battery powered RotoZip. The one I had was made by Ryobi and it worked flawlessly, so get your hands on one of those. You don't need to lug around a cord, and all the cuts you need to make in the drywall for the lights, outlet boxes, switch boxes, all that. It makes it super easy and painless, as long as you have it adjusted to the right depth. Another thing I want to point out here is, as this is in my basement and I'm putting drywall on my basement ceiling, make sure you put access panels in while you're installing the drywall, or else you will not remember where those valves are or where certain things you need to get to are. You just will have to cut a bunch of holes to try to find it. So I was putting access panels in and important valves, or if there was a junction box, just so that I would remember, and obviously I can access it if I needed to while I was working on the project. When it came to hanging the drywall sheets on the wall itself, you always want to do the top piece first, get a full section first, and then the lower piece you're going to make that horizontal cut. And you also want to stagger your joints as well so that they don't line up. You want as least amount of joints as possible, but if you have to, you want to make sure you stagger them. Another thing I did here too is did all the outside walls first, and then once I got the outside walls done, I worked my way from back to front where the drywall was sitting, so that those bigger sheets I had to get through, I could just slide it through wall joists and such and not have to get it through doors, as they are some pretty big sheets and they can be kind of hard to get to certain places once you have the walls up. When it came to the time frame for hanging the drywall, I believe it was a few days, maybe 3 to 4 days if I remember correctly. It was roughly a 550 square foot space I was doing, and then obviously I had a lot of duct work and stuff to go around in the ceilings. It wasn't just super flush, hang a sheet and keep going. I had to do a lot of cuts and make a lot of measurements and such. Thankfully, my dad came in the end there to help me finish up, which, as the saying goes, many hands makes light work. If you can have a friend or even hire someone to come help you with drywall, it's definitely worth it for hanging it, as it's heavy and there's a lot of it to do. So if you can get a friend or even you get your wife in on it, it will definitely lessen the workload on you, as doing it yourself can be very difficult sometimes. Another thing here with the drywall is when it came to drywalling on the steps, I made a mistake and kind of did it the wrong way. So what I had to end up doing was make a template and use that to actually follow the outline of the steps, because I had those 2x4s pressed up against the steps. But what I should have done is had a 1x10, 1x12 piece of board pressed up above the steps and then put the 2x4s to that, so that it would have just been a nice angle cut down. I definitely made a mistake here in doing it. It worked out. I made it work. However, it took way more time than it should have to put the drywall on the steps. While I was finishing up some of the drywall hanging, my dad came and tied in the electrical lines into the panel. We tied it into a sub panel that we installed. There is another video on my channel showing how my dad and I installed this, so check that video out if you want to see it more in depth. Once that was done, it was time to start taping and mudding. When it comes to doing this, it's a 3-step process. So from what I've learned, I'm no professional by any means. However, you put mud on your seams, then you put tape on your seams, then you put another coat of mud over, and you also make sure you fill in all your screw holes when you're doing that. Let that dry for a day or two depending on your moisture content and everything in where you're working. Once that's dried, come back, sand it down. Once it's sanded down, come back again, put a second coat on, no taping anymore, just a second coat over all your seams and nail holes. Let that second coat dry, sand it down again, and then come back with your third finish coat and again put that spackle on, sand it down, and then you're ready to paint. With every coat, you want to get wider in your seams to make it more flush and less noticeable when it comes to seams in your drywall boards. Like I said before, this is again a reason why you want to start with those full pieces at the top of your ceiling and down, because your eyes are drawn to the top. They're drawn to where the wall meets the ceiling normally, because that's obviously the height you're at for the most part. So you always want the seams at a lower point if you can keep it like that. Also, when it comes to corners, you want to make sure to use corner beads. For the ceiling corner beads, or where my HVAC was at and I needed to have those corners at, I used a paper corner bead with a metal inside, and I used a 3M glue adhesive to put it on. And then after that, I put mud over that. That worked pretty well. It was less of a mess than putting mud on the back. However, it's perfectly fine to put mud on the back of a corner bead and then put that on with those paper corner beads. And then for all the corners I had on the walls, I used plastic corner beads. I stapled them in with my stapler and then put a couple coats of mud over them, which is usually about 3 coats, like I said. widening those coats each time you put it on. Drywall is a very intensive process. If I could have anything in this project sent out for someone else to do or have someone else come in and do it, it would be the mudding of the drywall. Hanging the drywall is not that bad, but when it comes to actually putting the spackle, putting the mud up, it's really labor intensive. It takes a lot of time and it takes some finesse and skill, which obviously I don't have. I don't do it for a living. So in the final product, it turned out pretty well. But I think if I hired someone, it would have turned out even better and been more seamless and flush. Yes, I would have been spending more money. However, in the end process, you want everything to look good and be happy with your product. And I think I would have been happier with the final result if I did hire someone out. However, though, if you do choose to do it yourself like I did, some tools that are a must-have in my mind, or the far and foremost priority, is having a plug-in sander that hooks to a vacuum, which you just saw right there. You need to have that. It makes sanding 10 times faster. It does a really good job at making everything flat, smooth, taking out any imperfections. So that's a must-have. Another tool to have is sanding blocks to get those tight corners. Also, you saw before we had these little tape roll holders on our hips. Those are really helpful in just rolling the tape out and putting it up and cutting it instead of having to hold the roll in our hands. So that's another must-have. Obviously, when it comes to putting the mud up, you need knives. So I would have a 4-inch knife, a 10-inch knife, and a 12-inch knife. I have all those to make each time you put a coat on wider. And then obviously you need a mud tray or some sort of way to hold your mud and scrape your spackle on and off. Also, this goes without saying in my mind, however, make sure to have a shop vac to hook that sander to. I have a nice rigid shop vac that works really well, and make sure to put not only a filter in there, but one of those bags that can catch and collect all that debris so you don't need to dump it all out and get the dust everywhere when it times to come to dump the vacuum out. Also, make sure you have a N95 mask on and hearing protection on using the sander or any type of sanding. Obviously not the hearing protection, but definitely the mask. This dust does get everywhere and it sucks to breathe in, trust me. I will make sure to link all the tools and products for this whole project that I use down in the description below. They are affiliate links, so it helps the channel out, guys. It helps me produce this content, so please click on them and use them if you want to buy any of the products that I used in this video. Once I got all that sanding done for the last coat, it was time to start cleaning up. I needed to start painting next, so I wanted to get the floors nice and clean. So I came back in there with my broom and my shop vac and got the floors all clean so any of that dust wouldn't be kicked up onto the ceiling or the walls when I started to paint. The method I chose to use for painting was spraying, and because I was spraying, I had to do a lot of good prep work. So we had to mask off all the windows with plastic and painter's tape and everything else that we didn't want to get any spray on. So the prep for spraying is pretty intense. However, I think it definitely is worth it because spraying goes on a whole lot faster than rolling it. The sprayer that I chose to use for this was the Graco Project Painter Plus. I got this at Lowe's, or Home Depot has it, or you can get it online. It retails for about $225 roughly. It is a hefty expense. However, I think it is very much so worth it for a massive project like this when you're doing it by yourself. When it came to the paint that I used the Lowe's Valspar brand PVA primer, and then the Lowe's Valspar brand, they're like mid-series paint for both the wall and the ceiling. I sprayed the primer on, then I sprayed the walls, and then as you can see here, I'm taping up all the walls to protect them from any spray from the ceiling. Some of you may be wondering, well, why didn't you just spray the ceiling first and then go to the walls? In the research I did, people said it was better to do the walls first and then spray the ceiling. I don't know if that's true. I personally think maybe it would have been easier for me to do the ceiling first and then just spray the walls. So I'd probably do it that way if I can do it again. However, it still saved a ton of time spraying instead of trying to hand roll it on or anything like that. The only thing is, if you do spray it and you want to tape up the walls, let the walls dry for at least like 5 days if you can wait. I waited only a day and it ended up pulling some of the paint off in certain spots with the painter's tape. As you can see here, I'm doing touch-ups there to stuff that got pulled off. It's just because it hadn't fully cured and dried yet, so that's why it got pulled off. So make sure you wait a little bit if you're going to end up taping. Once I got all the painting done, this is really where everything started to come together. My next step here was putting the shower trim on, which took but 30 minutes roughly. After that shower trim was on, I moved to the lights and outlets and switches. Some switches were already in, some switches I had to put in, and then obviously I had to put all the covers on the outlets and such. The hardest switches to hook up were right there in the bathroom for the heated vent light. 4 separate switches for that. You got the heat, the fan, the light, and the night light, and then obviously the light above the vanity. Everything else was fairly straightforward and simple though. Just had 2 sets of wires coming out for each outlets until it was terminated at one outlet. And like I said, I used just 15 amp breaker and 14 gauge wire for all those outlets. Once that was done, I started to move on to the flooring, which I used a LVP or luxury vinyl plank flooring made by Matrix. I don't believe they sell this anymore. However, I did get it at Lowe's for a very good price. I believe it was about $1.99 per square foot, which is a decent price in today's world. However, the stuff did install very nicely, but it was very thin, which can be nice because it's flexible, but it also means more chances of breaking or snapping. One thing I want to touch upon here too is I'm going directly over the concrete. According to my codes, this was fine. There is also a underlayment side already attached to the vinyl plank. I know some people are like, well, why didn't you put down the underlayment before? Well, it's pre-attached to the plank, so I didn't have to do any of that. So that's why I can just roll with what I got. Also, one thing I did here too is I didn't use transition strips, so that's why you can see a nice seamless look through all the door jambs. This was a little difficult, however it did line up nicely because everything was nice and square. Which, like I said, as long as you can keep everything nice and square, your floor will rock on and look seamless throughout the whole area you're flooring. One thing to remember too when you're flooring a basement is, does your basement get water? If your basement gets water, honestly, I would epoxy or paint your floor, because then when the water comes in, you don't have to worry about tearing any floor up or getting any mold. So that's just something to remember. Now it was time to install the vanity. As you saw before, I pre-installed those faucets on the vanity top. I just slid the vanity in there, had all the angle stops on, and did all my hookups underneath the sink. One thing with the vanity is, in my opinion, you want to purchase this before you start really any of your project, because you need the measurements off the vanity to make sure that it can slide into the place that you're going to fit it. It's just easier because vanities may take a while to get. This one took like a month to get, so just try to stay ahead of the game and purchase some stuff beforehand before you get into the project too much so that you have the right measurement. After most of the bathroom fixtures were up, I moved on to installing the doors. These were the doors where they separated, so essentially there was the trim on both sides of the door and then you slid them together. I liked installing these. I think they worked well. However, if you want your own custom trim, I would not get these doors. A big thing to remember when installing doors too is to open and close it multiple times so you make sure that door actually shuts and is nice and flush with everything and that everything's nice and level. It may take some time installing that first door or two, but after you do one or two, you get a hang of how everything needs to go and you can start cruising through doing it. Once all those doors are in, it was time to start installing the trim. I used a 1x4 MDF baseboard. It was a good price and I like the look of it. I just used my 16 gauge nailer and nailed it into all the studs, and then once I was done with that, I came back and caulked everything in place. I also quickly installed the hardware for the bathroom as well while I was doing the trim in the bathroom. There were 2 things I would have done different when installing this trim. The first thing is pre-painting the trim before installing it, and the second thing being gluing all those corners together with some sort of super glue or adhesive. And the reason I say that for the second thing is they will pull apart over time, which I've learned, so it's just more so of a couple years down the road you don't want to have to fix something again. Going back to the painting the trim before putting it on, it was a pain to do 2 to 3 coats on this already primed trim on your hands and knees, brushing away. So if you can set it all up on a table beforehand and put those coats on, and then after you nail it in place, just come back and obviously touch up where your nail holes are and any other touch-ups, it'll make it a lot easier and a lot quicker in my opinion. And you could also spray the trim, which you'll get a lot better finish on the trim when you do it like that. One tool I'd personally recommend when doing the trim is a battery powered caulk gun, which you can see me using there. For basically half a day of pulling a hand caulk gun, your hand's gonna be killing you if you don't do it every day. So that battery powered caulk gun really helped me out and really helped it go a lot smoother and quicker. And it also has a nice even consistent flow of caulk coming out of it. So I definitely would get one if you can. Once all the caulking was done, I needed to paint the doors. To paint the doors, I took them off the frame and took all the hardware off, and then I ended up using my sprayer that I used to spray the walls. I tried to use a smaller sprayer I had, but it didn't work good, so I just used that sprayer. Also, the reason I sprayed them inside my basement was I didn't know what the weather was going to do that day, and I didn't want to get them dirty or wet or anything. Once everything was painted up and those doors were done drying, I came back and remounted the doors and then put all the door hardware on it. Made sure everything shut nice and smooth and was nice and flush and tight. Once that was complete, I moved on to working on the closet system. This was like a $150, $100 system I bought on Amazon. I threw up in there just to be able to have something to identify that that was a closet. And then the last step here was putting the stairs up. This was actually the hardest decision of the whole project, I'd say, is what to do with our stairs. And we ended up deciding to put the luxury vinyl plank on the stairs, both as the riser and the tread, and use the bull nose piece that they make that matches the vinyl plank to make that nice seamless look. As you can see, the setup I have to the right there, I'd highly recommend a table with a LVP flooring cutter and a jigsaw and a speed square. Those are 3 essential tools to doing these stairs or any vinyl flooring project in general. I would also have a template, a stair tread template, which essentially adjusts to your stairs and gets that perfect, nice, tight fit and measurement for that vinyl plank to go down and barely have any gap between both sides on the walls. When it came to gluing it down, I used a Loctite adhesive and put it on the back side of the plank and pushed it down firm. And then when it came to the bull nose, again, I glued it down and then put tape down to just kind of hold it in place. And then you give it a day or two to dry, and it's hard as a rock and it won't come up at all. And then after I finished up the stairs, this project was officially wrapped up and done. I know a lot of you are going to be wondering how much did this cost and how long did it take me. Like I said, I did this project 1.5 years ago, so it was a long time ago. From what I can remember, it was about $15,000 worth of material and some tools I had to buy. And I started this project July 1st, roughly, or actually middle of July. And I finished it end of August, and that was not working every day on the project. I believe it was roughly about 20 to 25 days, about 10-hour days put into this project with some small bits and pieces here and there on certain days. With that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll make sure to link as much tools and material that I use down in the description below. Again, some of them are affiliate links, so please use them. It helps this channel out to keep growing and producing content. I hope you guys all enjoyed this video. I hope you learn a lot as I did through this process. And if you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good day.